Muy buenas noches. Good evening. I'm Marta Moreno Vega, the coordinator and director of Creative Justice Initiative. And welcome today to our conversation. I'm most excited. I'm surrounded by people that I admire, that I love and respect their work because they're brave. And being brave means speaking out, standing your ground, creating intentionally for our community's solidarity and our community's health. So, in this spirit, culturally empowered arts movement for justice is really designed, right, to express how people create, not only create their work, but also what empowers their work. Because oftentimes, in this society that we live in, erroneously talks about how we're individuals and we're not part of community, or that we create in isolation of others. But I think that our community historically has stayed together because we are community, because we see each other and reflect each other in everything that we do. And in that process, educate our future generations. So I'm so excited to be surrounded by people that are empowering, that bring love to our community, but also bring a powerful message, an intentional message. So Ina, Gerardo, Jampi, Yamin, Amalia, Rashida, thank you so much for having me agreed to be part of this conversation, which I know will continue as we continue to build these conversations over time. So I start by introducing you to the moderator, who is a sister from another mother, Amalia Mesa Baines. Amalia and I met in England, of all places, because we were brought in to speak about multiculturalism. And when we got there, we realized that we were the only people of color, and we needed to go out and find our tribe. So we almost stopped the conference, went out and found people that needed to be there and weren't there because the conference didn't want them there. So we made sure that our presence was felt, not only because we came in, but we were not going to parachute in. We were going to involve the community that needed to be present in the conversations. So Amalia Mesa Baines, my sister.
Thank you. Martha leaves out the really fun parts of what we did at the conference, and that they almost booted us out. They thought we were a little bit, I think, too aggressive. And also one of the things that I remember, and I think it's part and parcel of the way we're looking at work even now, is that we're learning about all the differences and complexities of our backgrounds and our heritage. And we saw ourselves as people of color, but we didn't realize that the Irish, the Welsh, and the Scottish had the boot of the British on their necks all their lives. And so they came to us and they said, you need to include us. We don't look like we're people of color, but we are treated like people of color in this place, this England. And so we spread our wings, and it was my first time to work with Martha. That was more than 35 years ago, and here I am. She calls me and I report for duty. And this is very exciting for me because in my own Chicana community, I have always been involved in the next generation. I started a project called Regeneration, which was actually inspired by Martha's cultural diversity, cultural grounding conferences that we did through the 80s and 90s. So I went back home because I'd been scolding old white people in their museums, and I got tired of it, and it made me sick. So I decided to go home and help build the next generation. And Regeneration was that project. So for me, this is another chance to meet and work with younger artists who are beyond emerging. I mean, I don't like those categories because they're based on another community's view of what you make. I think those terms like emerging or established are really about, in a sense, the marketplace of art, and that's not what we do. So today I would like to be able to be talking with other artists whose art serves the goals of justice and affirms both our cultural and spiritual life. And I think that what we'll learn today is about how that manifests itself, not just in the form of what people do, but the content of what they make and the purpose of it and what action it serves. And that's in many ways, I think, what has kept us safer from the art world than anything else, is that we work toward a purpose and we work toward a goal. And we have alliances in our communities, and we're grassroots activists who start from the bottom up. And I think that is something that cannot be found in the normal or expanded art world. So I'm hoping today that we'll talk about not just how people are working, but who they're working with and why they're working. One of the things that Martha said the other day that has been resonating with me, and I thought about it even this morning, is that this conversation today is not about the past, Martha and I, or the present, all of you, but in fact, the continuity of movements that have kept us being able to create and in some sense, in my case, my mentor, Yolanda Garfias Wu, who is Oaxaqueña, she was my first teacher in the program Teacher Corps when I was a little bit into my 20s. She changed my entire life. She taught me about the Mesoamerican world. We as Chicanos were just coming into our own and trying to understand. This was the 60s and early 70s. So I think we'll learn today who influences you, who are the people who have inspired you. And in some way, that continuity, I think we've talked a lot about art without barriers. So we've had to overcome those barriers, and we've had to work against the opposition of a racist society, a colonial society, because I don't say post-colonial because I think it's still there. Mm-hmm. And so I thought maybe we would start with asking each person to talk a little bit about their work, and then we can see the images, and then maybe after that we can move forward on a discussion on what connects these works to each other. So if Imna would like to start, that would be really great, and we could show her work.
Hi. Buenas noches, everybody. I'm Imna Arroyo. I am Imna Iris Arroyo Cora Bolorin Masobeldegue. And I'm saying all of this to honor all my ancestors that are here with me today. I am a visual artist. I'm a printmaker. I was trained as a printmaker and moved into other areas according to where the work and spirit want to move me through. So my works that you see here is the many faces of Yemaya, because water and spirit was calling me at the time. And so that inspired my work. The ancestors of the passage, which are the sculptures, ancestors called me for that one when I was standing at the door of no return in Ghana. So these pieces emerged. And I was in Brazil, in Bahia, and it was Iroko, nature, environment that brought me in. So my work is fueled by spirit and what's happening at the time where spirit is expressing itself. I am a retired professor. I taught printmaking. I left a beautiful printmaking studio at Eastern Connecticut State University when I retired. But I was told that I didn't retire. Yo me jubilé, and I am in jubilo right now. So I've been enjoying the joy of jubilo, working in the studio. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Gerardo, would you like to say something about your work?
Yeah, sure, of course. So hello and welcome to our wonderful discussion. My name is Gerardo Castro. I am an artist, a visual artist. I was also a printmaker. Mm-hmm. And just like Imna, the spirit took me to places that I didn't think I was gonna go, but I followed that voice. And my work at the moment explores politics of identity, gender, colonization, spirituality, religion. I consider myself a queer artist. And by that, I mean that I apply the concepts of working through ideas and places in which the LGBTQ community has been left out of. It's very important for my work to acknowledge certain things, and one of them is my queerness. I particularly am working now more with the concepts of the Yoruba and the Santeria religion, and they come through my work even at times in which I think that I'm about to shift, and it doesn't happen. The orishas want to come through, and I allow them. And I love that language, that connection that I have with the orishas in my work. I believe that in order to be inspired, you have to be willing to be open to experience inspiration.
Mm.
And that happens because I've learned that there's inspiration throughout my entire day at moments in which I didn't expect it. In terms of my ancestors and my connection to the ancestors, I find that the ancestors are us, and we are reborn, and it's a continuum that is magnificent and beautiful. Throughout the study of these traditional ways of understanding ancestors and how they play a role in our lives, one of the things that I realized is that the ancestors are in everything. They're in plants, they're in animals, they're in celestial bodies, they're in the water, they're in the sky. They're here right now, they're watching, they're attending. And so my work has a reflection of that. I'm inspired by and influenced by certain artists or people that have tremendously changed my life. And one of them, I think he just called me a few minutes ago. I didn't answer the phone because the conversations are never 5 minutes. And his name is Ben Jones. And Ben Jones and I have been friends. He was my mentor in college in 1985, and we're still very, very, very close. I'm also inspired by men and women and children that have completely opened the doors for us to have this voice that we have today. For example, in some of my work, and I will toot her horn for a few minutes, is Dr. Vega. I did a painting of Dr. Vega many years ago because there she is. She inspired me when I saw her at the Caribbean Cultural Center before they have moved to Harlem. And this was a long time ago. I know she meets many people, so she probably doesn't remember me, but I was in awe when I met her that moment. And she manifested as a Watala, and there she is. Other people that I admire are like Marielle Franco, the Brazilian activist that was murdered in Rio a few years ago. And one of the people that I really, really admire that I wish I would have met was Sylvia de Villard. Sylvia de Villard is, to me, there's a painting I did of her on the right side of the screen. I just love Sylvia de Villard, a Puerto Rican activist, scholar, actress, dancer, who fought for the equal rights of Black Puerto Rican artists, and I think she needs to be more out there than what she is. Well, I think that's it for now. We'll continue this conversation as we go through.
Yasmin?
Hello, everyone. So excited to be part of this conversation. My work today is based mostly in Boricua bioluminescence. It is a process that started for me in Vieques in 2006 when I witnessed for the first time the bioluminescent bay there. I am now rematriated. I was born and raised in Brooklyn and have been living in Puerto Rico, or Borique, my parents' birthplace, for 8 years now. And so much has shifted in my mindset, in my ways of being and seeing. And bioluminescence here has revealed itself as just an incredible lesson for these times, right? These times in the darkness of these apagones that we're living incessantly, unfortunately. But bigger than that, the darkness of colonialism and climate change. And what I also have been reflecting on in these times, this week is actually like 2 years since I had an eye surgery. And so I've had to consider how I see, as an artist, the importance of being physically sighted. But what I recognize is that I see Black as like a natural background for me. And I think that's because of growing up in an Espiritista family and not thinking about the confines of where we are and where we live, like the confines they impose on us, how to be more expansive. Since I was little, my grandfather would always say, tenemos que tirar el pensamiento hacia el infinito, ¿verdad? Like we have to throw our thoughts out into infinity. So how can we just think expansively? And if I think expansively, I think of the universe, I think of space, where that is how we can appreciate stars and celestial bodies. And so the practice that I took on from the dinoflagellates, these microorganisms that light up 3 of Puerto Rico's bays, is that this is how I paint our ancestors. Folks that have passed on, I paint them in the blue of those waters. Ancestors for me are crucial to my work. A lot of the portraits, I'm mostly a portraitist. A lot of the portraits that I paint are people that have passed. These 2 images are actually from 2 installations from a new space that I'm opening tomorrow in Mayagüez. It's an art space, and it's a community space dedicated to bioluminescence. I call it Cucubanación, from Cucubano, our bioluminescent click beetles, and nation, right? Talking about Puerto Rico's continued position as a colony. So colonies are still very much alive in Puerto Rico. And so this is sort of my latest project, which is a fusion of all of these things. But as for ancestors, I was reflecting today how I have a lot of ancestors that are younger than I, right? And thinking about so much on wellness, about the conditions that we live, and so many of our people falling ill, passing before their time, so many destinies cut short. I think of this constant relationship between our ancestors, those that have passed, and what we have left here to fulfill. What are those stories cut short that we're forced to pick up on, and how we can't waste our purpose, our time ever, right? That's pretty much what I'll share for now.
Thank you. Thank you. Rashida, I think we're going to be looking at a video, right?
That's correct. And I think it's okay if you play like a short section of the sound, but then you can just mute and I will speak. Okay. Just so you can hear. Okay, you can mute. Thank you. So first of all, I want to say thank you so much, Marta, for the invitation to be here and to be a part of this conversation. And I'm very honored also to be in a conversation with Yasmin, because I'm such a big fan of your work, and really honored to learn also about everyone else's beautiful practices. And I want to start, Marta asked us to talk about lineage, and I want to really name my teachers because whenever I write about my work, I say that I'm in a choreographic lineage with people in a chain of transmission with people that are not only direct teachers, but also antecedents for the work that I do. So my teacher, who you'll see in the middle here, is Adenike Sharpley, who is a dance teacher and also a priestess of Oshun. And she's my teacher from Oberlin College. And she's always at the center of because, we don't fall out of the sky and we don't learn these traditions by watching them on YouTube. I mean, we can, but, I think also we learn them because someone who has that chain of transmission understands that we can hold that information and that knowledge. So that's Adenike Sharpley. And then I was also trained by Tony Lambre, who's my tap teacher, who I met at my dance school as a child in the basement of our church. And I always talk about it as an underground space because it was a space where we were being given a certain access through this idea of repetition. And I think, we would literally do like 1,000 shuffles standing at the bar. And that was really a preparation for improvisation. And I think about the genius of Black repetition as really like a foundational aspect of what we're taught in these spaces like Black dancing schools. And then Joyce Moso, who was a director of that school, Margaret Christian, who's my dance teacher's teacher, Catherine Dunham, of course, Zornell Hurston, of course, Sevilla Fort, and Kamal Brathwaite, who was my teacher at NYU. And, I know we're going to continue to talk, but the main thing I'll say about my practice is really about a moral obligation to attend to Black healing. Because I think that there's so much focus on showing Black suffering. And I think that the movement and music languages of the Black vernacular American Southern traditions are really critical to this moment, especially in this moment, which, we can talk about erasure, displacement, colonialism, gentrification, these kind of racial trauma. These forms were actually created to respond to those specific conditions that have not gone away. And so, I think that as someone who's been given, through these teachers access to these forms, it's my obligation to use them, in the time that we're in now. So I'll stop there. What you're seeing is a piece called Run Mary Run, which is a ring shout. And a ring shout is really a unifying old tradition that you see throughout the Caribbean. You see I would call it a global South tradition, which survived the catastrophe of the Middle Passage.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, that was great. Juan Pablo, are you ready to talk about your work?
Yes. Hi. Good evening, everybody. My name is Juan Pablo Vizcaíno. I started working in Vejigante, Mass. Around 2001, which is our traditional coconut mass from Loíza. We don't have a teacher or a class of that type of art, or we didn't have back then. So I started doing it by what I have seen in my life in Loíza, seeing the Los Hermanos Ayala mass, seeing the work of Samuel Lin, of Daniel Lin, and I just started trying to create it. I left it for a period of time, and then in 2006, evolved a danger to our community, which had been fought in the past by other members of the community, which was a big hotel that was gonna take place in Piñones, a sector of Loíza. So in that moment, I started or continue doing the Vejigante Mass as a way of showing the kids of the community their traditions and the importance of their history. So they could kind of like engage more with the importance of protecting Loíza out of that monstrous hotel that it was just gonna be the beginning of the end for such of an important community. In that moment, I started doing Vejigante as a way of protesting and a way of teaching, and then that evolved into me continuing investigating more about it, understanding more the nature and the definition of it given by the colonial books and education of our island, and understanding more and trying in that process and within these years I have dedicated myself to, as other artists in the past, redefine or rename or put in place the actual importance and meaning of it, and taking away that negative connotation that was given to it because of colonialism and racism. And in that process, I've just continued learning about it and also making my peace with that same religion that made it as something diabolic. It's a lot of conflict in my practice because of the spiritual element to it. So I am in this moment of my short artist career, if I could say, I am trying to make peace with our African descendant and religion, and our Hispanic descendant and religions. I'm trying to make peace because of the love that I have for my family that are Christian believers.
You're breaking up a little bit. Parece que you moved. ¿Te moviste?
No.
Porque the voice is breaking up.
Yeah. So I am making, at this moment, I'm making peace with both religion that have formed me in life, or both spiritual aspect that have formed me in my artistic life, and working in Vejigante as a way of protest, as a way of calling for action in order to protect our communities and the danger of that we face in the daily in Loíza, that is the gentrification, displacement, and not justice for our people, and in horrible moments like the recent hurricanes.
Great. Oh, so many thoughts racing around in my mind. I guess I will talk a little bit about my work, since I believe Olga has them up. I'm trying to see where they are. No? Okay. Well, then I will just move on with talking about some of the questions that sprang up. When we were on a sort of pre-call, it was a tech check. Several things came up, and I've been thinking about them quite a bit. And one of them was this idea of a spiritual or ancestral mandate. I don't know who brought it up, but it was something, I think it was Yasmin. Yeah, it was something that I thought was connected in many of the works we've been looking at and talking about. So if there's anyone who wants to begin, maybe Yasmin, you would begin talking about what that intention was for you.
Yes, thank you for remembering and bringing that. Just the idea that as artists we can be in our studios and have an inspiration that comes to us, but for me, that inspiration too often is not too often, because I embrace it. It comes in the form of a dictate, of a mandate, of this is what you are to create. Sometimes there are these challenges that I have no idea how I'm going to create, but I have to set out to figure it out. And I think that in many respects, it's just ancestral stories that need to be recaptured, that don't want to be forgotten. And so the question is, how much of our work is our work? Maybe it's like 15% of the work is ours, and then the rest is all these ancestors coming through to present their story and their images and visibilize what was taken from them in their own past and their own existences here.
Is there anyone else who was responding to that thought? Imna needs her mic on.
Sorry, go ahead. Imna.
Oh, for me, it began always like an inspiration, but at the end of the day, the inspiration is really moved by the spirit itself. The ancestors of the passage, when that piece was done, I bought a ton of clay, and I was not a sculptor, because when I stand at the door of no return in Ghana, I realized that the ancestors, the Egunguns, the Eguns, was telling me that I needed to do this. And who in their right mind buys a ton of clay? And I did. And I worked every day until those pieces were done, and a multimedia was created, because at that point I realized that it was about healing. It was about moving the message to acknowledge the atrocities that were done. And at that point, your husband would say, "What's wrong with you?" And you go like, "I'm sorry, I can't stop." And that has been my creative process all along. And to the last one that we have right now at the El Museo Casa del Libro, is all about Eshu Elegba, because he wanted to be represented there. And who's going to say no to Elegba? You know, so I went, carry me, take me with you. What is it that we need to say here that you want me to come to Puerto Rico and bring in this awesome Orisha that opens door, that is renewal, that is revolution, that is change? So one moves with the spirit and see what happens. Gracias.
Any other responses?
Well, I personally think that great art is bred where the artist is closest to the core of their humanity. And that's why Imna's piece is brilliant.
Oh, it's
It just connects you to the core of humanity, including the other artists, because I've been checking everyone's work out for the last couple of days. It's just magnificent. I think that when I enter my studio, there are moments in which I don't know what's going to happen. I sometimes sit there and I'm looking around the room, and in my studio, that's where my Bóveda, where Espiritismo is, the Orishas are in there as well. And I sometimes, especially with Elegba, I joke and I say, all right, it's time for you to throw something at me because I'm just sitting here now. And it doesn't happen that way, because we know with Elegba, it happens when he wants it to happen. So I sit there and I think and I look, and as I'm about to leave the room, something says, wait a minute. And I've learned to listen. I've learned to listen. When I was a younger artist, I remember that I was very stubborn, where I wanted to create something and it had to happen at that moment. And because it had to be right now. It doesn't happen like that anymore. I love that sound. So I just think that this idea that the ancestors are present in everything that we do and all around us is very important to remember. They're in spaces that we never even expected to experience them. And we've all had these experiences as people that work with the spirit. And that is that you could be walking down the street and suddenly a piece of paper flies by and it's the color of something that you were looking for, that color, and that's the color you wanted to use. It happened to me the other day. I was looking at something in the street and I was like, wait a minute, that is the exact color I needed. Of course, I pick it up and I bring it to my studio and it's sitting on a wall, and now it's going to be part of something. That's why I think that this idea of inspiration, you have to be open to experience that. And it happens. It happens in wonderful ways, how the ancestors come through.
Well, many of you have been talking about the orishas, and I'm not sure that everybody knows what orishas are, right? Or what their existence is in our life. So maybe somebody can sort of define what spirit, how spirit manifests, or how you visualize spirit. And Rashida mentioned that her teacher, right? Her mentor has Oshun made. Now, what does that mean? Because I think that many in the audience may not know. And all of you are talking about spirit, right? And Yampi as well, you know, that he's sort of grappling with, you know, ancestral spirit as well as a system of belief, right, that was imposed through colonialism. And how does that manifest in sort of developing who we are, how we have developed, right?
Yep.
So can you share, Rashida?
Sure. My teacher is initiated into Lukumi, and she was initiated in Cleveland, Ohio. And so you think, you know, this is an Afro-Cuban religion, and how did it get to Cleveland, Ohio? And so I think, you know, the way that I name the teachers, I think we could use that. It's a similar metaphor of someone is your teacher and they initiate you into those Orisha. And we know that all of these Orisha came from Africa, came from Nigeria. And when you look at the form of the ring shout specifically, that also is looking at Central African form. So sometimes we actually draw the Congo cosmogram, which is basically the worldview of Central Africa, and it's a circle with a cross, which is the crossroads. We draw that on the ground when we're doing the ring shout, and it's, you know, it serves a functional purpose where, you know, the circle doesn't become like some weird other shape, but obviously it also serves a spiritual purpose, which I read Robert Farris Thompson talk about it as singing and drawing a point. Then when you draw something and you also sing into that veve or drawing or representation, that it's a way of charging it and, you know, bringing the spirit physically to that space. And you see that happen. You know, we're talking about it. Most of us are talking about Orisha and Afro-Cuban context, but you also see it happen in the spiritual Baptist church. You see it in Shango Baptist in Trinidad and Tobago. And so these are the way that these forms were carried with people on ships, you know, during the Middle Passage, and the way that we've recovered them. It shows up in different ways, but they're very much, you know, overlapping traditions that can inform each other and speak to each other. And so, you know, she is a priestess, and so she's also a spiritualist, which is why it's important, as you can see in that performance, that I was having a heightened experience. I was in the church, they would call that getting happy, or, you know, your ancestors are mounting you. There's many ways to talk about it, but you need somebody who's actually going to keep everyone safe in that kind of context, because these are things that would usually happen. I talked about like underground spaces. This would usually happen in a private context. So when you're doing something like that for a performance, you have to do specific things to make sure that everyone is safe, both spiritually safe, physically safe, et cetera. And, it also took a while for us to feel comfortable saying, okay, well, this is something that we should share in a public context. And I think I spoke a little bit just about this obligation to Black healing. And sometimes, a lot of our forms were hidden in plain view for safety purposes, but also people may not have access to them if there isn't a space or platform for us to understand the roots of in this case, Black music or popular music and all the things that are extracted from us in popular culture, for us to understand that they actually belong to us and they have a function for us as well. So I know that was a very long way of talking about that, Marta, but I think all of these traditions serve many purposes for us, especially as artists. And I love this idea of a mandate, because that is so true. I never thought that I would be making this kind of work, like when I was training in tap dance or African dance, et cetera. But, the ancestors had, they had an idea of what they wanted me to do, and we have to listen.
When I was listening to Rashida, I was thinking about, you said something so, so important. And it's this idea of when we move from the intimate, protected spaces of our cultural community and we go out into the world, because all of us on this talk today are artists. Some of us are well-known artists. Some of us exhibit, for lack of a better word, in other places. And I know for myself, when I was a young artist, doing basically ofrendas y altares within the community where the spaces were cleansed and blessed and I could be safe there, and we did the things that were important to us. When I started crossing over in the 80s, because I started in the early 70s, when I crossed over in the 80s into major museums, then I had to deal with the fact that I was not doing the same work. What was I doing? And it was a struggle. I was very touched by what you were talking about, when you come to terms with the fact that we are obligated through our ancestors to follow one form, but we have been, by colonialism, transformed in other ways. And some part of our life as artists and practitioners is to try to make sense out of that. So for me, when I started crossing over, these are like descansos, and eventually I started turning interior spaces into ofrendas. So Transparent Migrations, the one on the left, has a recreation of Tenochtitlan, the ancient city of the Aztecs, on the floor. The color inside is the color of the nopal, the red fruit that grows. And that dress is a dress I created, and it's my wedding mantilla. So it is a story about our journeys. And it was in a show called Road to Aztlan, where after many, many decades of Chicanos uplifting the idea of their Mesoamerican heritage, we actually found out all that we had believed was true, and that these spaces had existed. But as I make my way through these different works, I've had to amend my practice. Museums don't let you light candles. Museums don't let you put, cempasúchil, the marigolds out. Museums don't like food. And how are you going to make an ofrenda to your ancestors if you have any food out? They just think you're cheap or something. So over the years, I had to amend it, and I see them now differently, but I know what the sources are. So this idea that Rashida talked about of moving out into other spaces and being willing to share those practices in a public setting. And I don't know what other people have experienced. What is that like for you? And do you have any ways of protecting yourself or protecting the space so that you can do that work, even if it's in the context, maybe outside of your own community? That's what happened to me.
Geraldo, you mentioned an experience when we were doing the tech. Would you like to share it?
So I had a situation in which a curator came to my studio because she wanted to talk about me exhibiting at a certain gallery. And I was sure, happy. Um, I don't know if she did her homework well enough regarding my work. Because one of the first things she said when she entered my space was, "What is that?" And we know when someone points at an orisha, we don't call it a that. And I said, "Oh, this is not gonna end well," because I knew that that's just not how you approach it. And I said, "Well, that's part of my religious and spiritual beliefs. That's an orisha." And a few minutes into the conversation, she said, "I have one question. Why do you only paint Black and brown people?" And it took me like by surprise, because I was like, does this woman not look at my work? Does she not know what I do? But my response to her and other people who might have that same thought, would you have gone to a white artist space and asked the white artist, why do you only paint white people? No, they wouldn't. They would not do that. So the idea that you're questioning, why do I paint Black and brown people? I really said, well, because throughout the history of art and the history of my career, I have never really seen Black and brown people being glorified in a way that they have put us in history books. So wherever I hang my work, I want to make sure that there's a Black or brown person in that space. But it still gets to me, the idea that someone would ask, why do you only paint Black and brown people? When I would never ask a Chinese artist, why do you paint Chinese people? Or any other artist of any other culture. And I think that there's a lack of understanding of our work. But at the same time, now there's such an interest in our work that there's so many shows that have come up where galleries and museums are dedicating what they think dedicating to the Black and brown experience. And there's some particular shows that come to mind, but that can get us into a different conversation, like the Whitney Museum right now with the Puerto Rican exhibition that's going to be taking place. I don't know. I just think that at times, what I've learned from that experience with that curator is that the viewer brings to the work what they really want to receive.
Yes.
That's exactly how I see it every time. Whatever you bring, that's what you're going to receive. And I guess she was bringing a colonial mentality of, why am I seeing Black and brown people in a painting? That's not how it should be. And it reflected in a way that that's what she received. And I let her know. I said, you wouldn't ask that of a white artist. Why do they only paint white people? So.
Well, I think that brings up the question that it's sort of like Amalia was addressing, right? That shift from a community space to another space, all right? What changes, right, for you as an artist, right? Speaking generally, but then the other piece to me is the importance of building spaces and institutions. I mean, Amalia comes out of La Galería de la Raza, right? When I met Amalia, I was the second director of El Museo del Barrio, a community space. Their parents, and the story is being told incorrectly, parents were the ones that decided they wanted their children to learn about our culture, right? WAMPI is developing Ancon, right? A space in El Ancon, historical space, right? that is now being transformed to an exhibition space as well. Yasmin is creating spaces, right? So that we all came into this creating safe spaces for telling our stories and showing our work, right? What is the importance of that at this point in time, right?
Well,
in having the voice, the power to tell your story, to show the story the way that you choose to show it without having to alter it.
Yep.
well, if
And
I,
Yapi,
yeah.
tú subiste la mano. Ajá.
Well, answering to both
¿Qué pasó?
questions.
Are we hearing you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Uh-huh.
Answering to both questions, the one before and the one now, when it comes to presenting in other spaces, what changed? I mean, I try not to change. I want to bring things as raw and as real as I created them. I recently had an experience where I felt more comfortable, being more careful for various reasons. I happen to be connect with the Hispanic Alliance in South Carolina, and I went for a couple of days with a friend, a partner, a colleague, Sacha Antonetti Lebron, and it was interesting that our travel there, as that region of United States is really conservative and really Christian. So it was really shocking. Immediately at the airport, we knew that we weren't in a space, the space that we're used to. We knew we were kind of like in a different space that the reaction was strange within the people that we immediately encountered at the airport. But then when we worked with the community, we had 2 days of work, one with the young youths of middle and high school. Most of the kids were immigrants, some Black. And it was a beautiful connection with us and them. And as these kids, some of these kids have passed through a traumatic experience, making it to United States, and their parents not speaking English, and then ending up in such of a conservative and American place where they're not the common people. They're totally different, and they don't know the language, and they're Mexicans or they're Nicaraguan and Argentinian. So it was really, really interesting to work with them. But I had to kind of like, in my expression of showing what El Bejiwante was and where it came from, I find myself really careful and choosing my words and how to express myself and how to explain that to them as I was in that space, and I wanted to. It would have been different than if I were working with Puerto Rican kids, like totally different, right? Then the next day, it was a beautiful experience. By the way, they got it. They understood what I said, and one of the experience that I most took from that workshop or for the kids is that I put them to work in one mass, 5 kids at a time in one mass, and they have to make decisions and if they're going to use their horns, how they're going to use it, painting. And one of the groups of the kids decided to put the flags or their own countries in the mass. So the 5 kids draw the flags of their country in the mass. So that was like amazing. That for me was like mind blowing. Then the next day, we had a presentation of my art in a specific space that they rented, and the majority of the people there were adults and part of the Hispanic Alliance and other people that support the alliance. So when it was my part, apart from having the art in the walls, was to make a presentation about El Gigante live, cut a mask, and they had cameras and screens and the whole thing and microphone. And me and Sasha, my colleague, talk about our experience as Afro-Caribbeans and our fight and our struggle in our communities and recent events like the hurricane and how our people were left behind and etc. And in that conversation also, we were pretty open and real because now these people are adults, but I was feeling that pressure of, you know, finding the right words to get the message across without people blocking their mind and not listening to me. And I believe that's part of that fear that we all encounter of being Black and being real and wanting to tell our story in such of a different place. But we did pass the message. People did understood. We have all sorts of reactions from people thanking us to, you know, people crying and people like feeling guilty. So it was, it was really interesting. And to answer the other one in a shorter time, because I took forever, the space of El Ancon is a space that us as a collective have revived with a lot of effort, a lot of pain, and a lot of time, but with that idea of continuing giving a name, expanding the name of Loíza and letting people know that we exist, that we're doing the job, that we exist, that we want to maintain our space and culture, and we're gonna defend it and yeah, through art we have find a really interesting reaction and you know, give a space to people to come and learn more from us and understand and support our project.
Thank you. Mm.
You know, when we started this conversation, Martha and I, so many years ago, I think the concept of justice is what brought us together, and also our ragefulness. We were both pretty pissed off in general, still are, and so this conversation today, which has taken us from ancestral mandates to spiritual practices to what Bell Hooks calls the home space, and those are the places where we are protected. They are the safe spaces where we gather with people who share our beliefs and who defend justice in the same way. So it seems to me that in some way we've gone full circle in the conversation, starting out about our spiritual lives and ancestors and everyone's various practices. We've come back around again, as Juan so eloquently put it, as defending, because there is a part of us that is always defending. And I know that at times we've talked about how we don't want to get caught up in this constant like battleground, or we don't want to be seen only by the injustices that we face. We want to affirm, as we have, those things that give us joy and bring love and strengthen us, our ancestors that live inside of us. But I think they're both one and the same. In the Chicano world, we call it resistance and affirmation. Those are our twin poles. And at the same time, when we cross over into the other spaces, and I learned this through Martha when she brought Amiri Barake to a project I was working on that she told me not to do. And I should be right. She was so right. 20 years later, I go, oh yeah, she was right. I shouldn't have done it. But I had hopes. You always have hopes. Anyway, he talked about something called the twin points of democracy and self-determination. And he said self-determination are our houses of culture, our institutions, our community. And democracy is what we are due because we have paid taxes, because we are the labor upon which this economy is based. And so they have to respond to us. So I feel that those are the things that in some way have galvanized us in part the work that we do. So I don't know if there's anyone who wants to have a last word, because I'm kind of aware of the time. Although, what does Olga say? I don't see anything on the the chat yet. So I'm thinking that we're close to the end of the time. And if there are things that people feel we haven't addressed, that maybe they might want to make a brief statement at the end.
Can I respond to Martha's question about spaces, about the
Yeah.
importance of creating spaces? And one of the things that I reflect on, especially Amalia, with this context that you elaborated on, like these home spaces, for me, as it emerged, was this concept of sovereignty, is the freedom to have that space where you can, sometimes we do have to respond to what we're doing there, and just knowing that the people you could respond to become the community, right? That you can have one plan, but if there's a community need that arises, that you can respond to that, as opposed to being told, okay, we can't have candles, or we can't have, like it happened to me here in Museo de Arte de Puerto Rico, we can't have caña, we can't have, vianda and natural produce inside the galleries because it could bring an infestation and things like that, right? So the sterile environment that is a gallery and a museum versus having the sovereignty to respond to what the community is needing and being able to flow with it. In the case of my space, it wasn't supposed to open after Hurricane Fiona. We decided to open to create un espacio sanativo, which is something that we responded to. I think back to the Young Lords and the acupuncture clinics that they would do. So in these individual spaces, we get to repeat those cycles of the generations that have done this work before, and I guess rescatar and rescue, salvage those aspects that get tossed when you have other entities, other institutions defining for you the programming and the art that you should be doing in order for them to support you and give you resources.
Yes.
Imna, you had.
I wanted to add that it's not about the changes you make, but we come in thinking that the work is going to bring healing, and it brings it into another level, in the sense that in my work, I have seen people crying and really being very emotional, and I find out that I really need to have a space, a safe space that people can be there. So the changes that I'm making is preparing the space ahead of time, so that could manifest, that people could be protected, that creates activities in which the community can figure out a way that they can partake and understand the experience. That for me is no longer is an art to go and look at, but you're coming here for an experience. And then we all have to be prepared when something actually happens, that we're not empty-handed, that we are there providing, that spirit is there helping to lift. And how do we manage to do that? So that for me is not just putting the works and dealing with the candles anymore. You have to lift it. You have to bring spirit to help you put it up and sustain it.
I wanted to also share and I love that you said sovereignty, Yasmin, because just thinking about these institutions, the work that I showed you that was at the Whitney Museum. But before I was invited to do it at the Whitney, I actually performed it for Caribbean Cultural Center, which we know Marta is the founder of. And I feel like we need these kind of incubation spaces where, we are able to do our practice and know that we are speaking to our own audience. So that when you go into these museums, and I've done a lot of work in museums, I'm a curator. And so, I also facilitate artists' work as well. And, I think it's really important to really understand, not just how to navigate those spaces, but really how to create sovereignty in those spaces where they don't actually see you coming. They don't actually know what they're asking for. And, I just actually organized a big conference in Venice because my close friend and interlocutor, Simone Lee, was the first Black woman to represent the United States at the Venice Biennale. And, you know, she has such an interesting perspective, right, on this idea of nationalism in general, this idea of representing the United States, you know, which is totally, for her, you know, an interesting idea, right? And the title of her exhibition is actually Sovereignty, Yasmin. And so one of the things that she wanted to do as part of this is really thinking about this idea of like being the first Black woman. Anything is like, you know, we started this conversation talking about a continuum. And, you know, one of the things that she always talks about is like, I only arrive here because of all of the Black women artists who have been making work, you know, many of whom never had an exhibition in these mainstream spaces, whose exhibitions were at El Museo, the Studio Museum in Harlem, community spaces, and lived their lives as artists throughout their whole lives, making this work. And you see all these kind of recovery shows happening in mainstream museums, like We Wanted a Revolution, looking at Black women artists who were working in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, who, you know, or like the Lorraine O'Grady exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum, these practices that have been so foundational to the work that you see now in contemporary art spaces, but, you know, were largely ignored by these museums when they should have been showing their work. And so I think, you know, one of the things that, you know, I've been thinking about listening to everyone talk is just that, you know, when the great responsibility that we have as stewards, not only of our own work, but as you said, Marta, building institutions, because, you know, we only function in community. And one of the things, like creating this conference in Venice, there were 700 I would say 700 Black women that showed up from around the world. It was a transnational conference, and it was really around this idea. It was called the Loophole of Retreat, which is really looking at Harriet Jacobs' incidents in the life of a slave girl, where when she escaped from enslavement, she was actually in a crawl space for 7 years, and she thought about this space as a space of you know, she was writing, she was thinking, she was having all of her kind of revelatory and revolutionary thoughts. But of course, that space was, you know, a double-edged sword of being completely oppressive and small. She, when she emerged from that space, she had disabilities from being, you know, scrunched down into this kind of immobility for all of these years. And so really just thinking it was really a metaphor for how do we create our revolutionary space with all these kind of constrictions, and how do we imagine the spaces that we need for our work to progress.
That's beautiful.
Absolutely.
Well, I am very grateful to all of you, especially Martha, for letting us have this conversation and engineering us to have this conversation. I'm experiencing the recovery myself, you know, because I'm almost 80 and I've done this work for 50 years. And for some reason, they can actually say and write the word Chicano now. I don't know how it happened. But so I think that what Rashida was talking about is really so touching, that it's taken all these years for so many people. Look at Cecilia Vicuña. All of these people who they haven't been waiting. None of us have been waiting. We've been working, we've been living, we've been choosing. But now is a particularly interesting time. But having lived through it before, I know that if you depend on the museum world for a sense of well-being, then you would be sick for 20 years, alive and well for 2, and then sick again for another 20, because they never stay with anything. So I'm always been supportive of Martha and my own institutions, because I believe, as it's a term I use, and I heard Rashida use it, which is incubators. Without these spaces and new spaces like Juan and Yasmin, without these spaces, we can't grow our work. We force people into that little crawl space then if they can't find a place to interact with their community. So I'm hoping that this talk will inspire other people to take up the mantle, or maybe the ancestral demand, to make spaces that are safe and welcoming for the community and for the artists themselves.
Absolutely. So I'd like to thank you all on behalf of the Creative Justice Initiative for sharing your thoughts, for sharing your experiences. And we will continue to have conversations like this because I think it's so important for people to understand our journeys. And we just went through the process of someone posting or saying that Geraldo referred to it, that the Whitney exhibition, the Puerto Rican exhibition on Maria, is the first major exhibition. I take issue with, I think our institutions are major, right? I don't have a problem, for people wanting to exhibit wherever they choose to exhibit. But when people start labeling things, then we have to correct that history, because it is our history and it is the story that we give to our children, the gift that we give to our children, and our continuity. So I had to take issue with the Whitney saying it was the first, because the first was in 1974 when El Museo and the Met developed an exhibition of Puerto Rican art. So this issue of first, like Rashida was talking about, is ridiculous, because whose standard is one looking at or using, or what value system are we looking at? And in my journey, I've always felt, and I've worked at institutions that label themselves major. So I labeled our institutions as the foundation of who we are, la fundación, el fundamento, if you will, of who we are. So the conversation continues. So we thank you so very much. Yasmin, Wampi, Geraldo, Inma, my sister, Amalia Mesa Baines, gracias. Olga, thank you so much for negotiating the technology. And Yasmin, much success with the new space, and you know that we're going to partner. And so all of you, stay well, stay healthy, and we will continue. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bendiciones.
Gracias. Thank you.
Santo a todos.